All right, I want to record a video, give another try, about sincerity. And really, I think what's coming through for me is a burp, first of all. um, it's like there's certain qualities of a healed heart, or certain qualities that emerge as we heal, as we move into greater wholeness, less division. But there are also kind of orientations all along the path. It's sort of like there's a place for having a commitment or discipline or an orientation that helps to maybe enliven or facilitate or the emergence of these properties of the healed heart. And sincerity is one of those words that means a lot to me. One of these values that I think is really important. Sincerity on the path. The importance of being earnest. It's a play, right? But yeah, also a really sincerity, earnesty. Yeah, I think has two meanings, the importance of being earnest. Anyways, simplicity. And the reason why I see these as sort of emergent properties, or the dynamics of that, I think is because a lot of what we mean by the ego, or sort of the dysfunctional self, is basically this kind of interlocking or just chaotic, knotted up mess of defense mechanisms, strategies, avoidance strategies, avoidance of pain, all the whatever's implied by that term shadow, repressed material, all the stuff that sort of, all the sort of subconscious programs that are kind of running the show till they get healed and released. In the depths, that stuff sort of on a deeper layer of creation, you could say. But it downstream from that, or you could say it filters up, it manifests as these sort of dysfunctional patterns: addiction, compulsive behavior, rumination, gossip, again, just all these sort of unhealthy strategies. But the thing is that they serve a purpose, because if they keep us from confronting or from feeling the Um, yeah, it's a little bit hard to put into language because on the one hand, you could say that they keep you safe, right? Our defense strategies keep us safe. It's like you put up these walls, sort of the equal opposite qualities of sincerity, of simplicity, of earnestness is guile, um, manipulation, inauthenticity, insincerity, irony, sarcasm. There's all this kind of almost like a cluster of different qualities and like their behavioral manifestations. But they serve this sort of defensive purpose because of our individual histories, because of our, you could say karmic patterns, because of the conditions that we're born into, our traumas, our wounds, all these other things. We develop these strategies that seem to keep us safe, and temporarily they do, but it's like you build these walls of protection, but you end up becoming imprisoned. Those become the walls of your prison. There's a cost to defense. Alienation, isolation, it's exhausting, building and maintaining all these, erecting and maintaining all these masks, right? So there's a cost, and you end up cutting yourself off, dividing yourself from your depths, from your light, from who you are. So yeah, it's just a mess. It's a total mess. But you commit to sincerity, you commit to being honest with yourself, trying to be honest in relationships. It's very hard because these patterns are so entrenched and they have so much momentum, and it's like the whole kind of economic apparatus of of the country, of the world. So much of it is built upon the amplification of desire, distraction, external gratification, hedonic pursuit. And so there's a lot of momentum that we're up against in the healing process. And so allow that recognition to be a kind of self-forgiveness, self-grace. You don't want to get too far into self-condemnation, or when you recognize you have these tendencies, all you're doing is just recognizing the human predicament, really. At another level, you can say you want to be accountable for your actions, and there's an autonomy and a power in recognizing and owning your mistakes and your patterns and all that. So it's like, yeah, you balance the grace, the self-forgiveness. I'm just doing the best I can with a kind of discipline, a kind of accountability, a kind of integrity. You kind of dance with those different qualities. Yeah, it can be really nice to hear you, and recognize you're just doing the best you can. And so It's just there's like so many things to say at once. It's like with these strategies we have, and I tried to kind of specify a few things, but when we're passive aggressive or insincere, irony can be a great kind of self-protective mechanism. But again, you're cutting yourself off from your own authenticity. It's like you can't wield those swords without cutting yourself. And reinforcing this kind of alienation. And so at some point, you recognize that what you want is transformation, not having the most sophisticated defense mechanisms, being the best at, manipulating, or the most protected, or the it's just, it costs too much. And so at some point you surrender. And you start working to transform that energy. One analogy that comes forward, and I've said this before, I think, I just recorded a video. I know I said this in a video, but I don't think I'm going to use that video. Anyways, one analogy that comes forward is, God as the sun, eternal effulgence, eternal outflow, infinite outflow, power, majesty, light, unending grace, the sun, just that radiance, that emanation, that we are these individuated rays of the sun, beams of consciousness. And when we've got a deep wound, and that there's all these, and it's like that light emanates all the way down into this apparent physical reality. But in between this surface of reality and the depths of God's infinite grace, it's like there's a whole gradient of creation. And a few levels back, from the surface, when we have a blockage from trauma, from unhealed, undigested, repressed material, you can see in that analogy, if you've got like the surface of reality, you've got God's radiance, the sun, and you've got this blockage here, frozen energy. The light hits that, cannot pass through. Or you could almost use the analogy of clouds in the sky, right? Really dense, dark clouds. Doesn't stop the sun from shining, but it casts a shadow onto the surface of the earth, onto the surface of reality. And so you can see in that analogy that if you just go up to the shadow and you try to sweep the shadow away, or clean the shadow, or you address it at that level, wiping away the shadow, it's futile. That you won't get the sunlight to shine through. You won't be able to disperse the shadow, to dissolve the shadow at the surface of reality. Just in this analogy, and it's not far off from the truth. It's one of these analogies that I think is actually pretty close to the reality. But so what you do is you go to the blockage and you heal the blockage. You liberate the density of the blockage. You dissolve the blockage, and the light starts to shine through. And the shadow on the surface of reality, that's kind of all the dysfunctional behaviors. That's the patterns of unhealthy our unhealthy tendencies and unhealthy behaviors, and that's how these deeper blockages, they show up that way. That's kind of the manifestation. That's the shadow that these blockages cast. But as you heal, as you go into the depths and you heal these blockages, it starts to decrease the density, starts to dissolve, starts to open up, and more light pours through. And so it's like the surface that filters up to the surface, right? And so the defense mechanisms just naturally start to unwind and to release and to liberate. And you become more, your beingness becomes more diaphanous, more transparent to God's light. So that starts to pour through. And I think that's a better, more holistic way to look at the healing process, because until you start to work at the depths, you could almost see our defense mechanisms and our unhealthy behaviors as in a sense, you could say the bad fruit or the emergent property, the manifestation, the inevitable. It's like the almost inevitable logical outcome of a deeper wound, a deeper blockage. And so if you're just sort of at that cosmetic, superficial level, removing an addiction, behavioral pattern, just trying to kind of white knuckle it, cold turkey, excise these things, keeping in mind that analogy, that frame, you can see how it's bound to fail. It's like trying to sweep away the shadow on the surface of the earth without moving the clouds or dissolving the clouds. And I think isn't that just kind of self-evident, you know? In other words, those strategies are serving a purpose, ultimately not the best purpose, but they're a kind of temporary band-aid, a kind of self-medication, a strategy to temporarily feel safe, even though it long-term it just reinforces the alienation, distance from God. But if you remove, they're compensating for something. So if you take this out without inserting something to compensate, you've got this vacuum, this very unstable place, this very unstable vacuum. So the more stable, reliable way is to work towards the depths and to heal and release it from that level. And then the surface starts to reflect that clarity, that peace, that simplicity, that sobriety. And which is not to say, again, there's a place for just where you're at in the middle, in the midst of our confusion and hurt and woundedness, for making that conscious commitment to refrain from addictive patterns, it's not to say you can't cold turkey something, but you do it through a total surrender to what is. But you can have that. It's good to have that commitment to being honest, being sincere even in the midst of our inauthenticity, in the midst of our confusion, to doing your best to prioritize those values and to bring them through. But they're greatly facilitated by doing the healing work. And I tried to bring this up in the video I did on gossip. It's hard because you don't want to be hectoring. You don't want to be moralistic. You find as you go on the path and as you heal, you find that there's a truth in sort of traditional moralities that comes through. But you don't really get to it top down, moralizing, browbeating, shaming somebody into a moral stance. It's more like the morality, traditional morality kind of points to a healed state. It's more like those are qualities that emerge, that sobriety, that kindness, that peacefulness, that moderation, that humility. It's like those things emerge with healing. And if you're just trying to paste it onto somebody's pain and suffering, that's not good. So forgive me, you know. Well, yeah, I'll just say it's not. It's a little difficult to talk about it because it can be really heard as moralizing. Yeah, and you also don't throw out morality. It's not about that either. But anyways, but yeah, I was trying to say in that video with gossip, it's like as you heal that kind of addictive pattern, psychological pattern, interpersonal pattern of gossip that sort of shores up the self-identity at the expense of somebody else and ultimately at your own expense, reinforces kind of pain avoidance, etc. But as you heal and that pattern lessens, there's a simplicity that comes online. All healing at the depth, it just facilitates this greater coherence. Less strategies are necessary. There's more wholeness. There's less inner division. And there's an insecurity at the heart of all these defensive strategies. Because there's a wound at the center. And there's a reliance on one's well-being on external factors being a certain way. And so you need to be, you get more and more controlling in relationships with other people, controlling how people view other people, controlling how people view you, controlling, addiction there's a control aspect to all of this that's based in this kind of fundamental feeling of unsafe. I'm unsafe. I need safety. But as that heals, there's a simplicity, there's a peace, there's a sincerity, but there's a freedom from paranoia. Sorry. I've just got so many things going right now. Hold on. So let's say that the sort of strategy that, gets kind of the strategy of gossip, we'll say, I mean, that's just a term. It's just describing these certain dynamics energetically that are going on. But there's a paranoia in that of, you're forming alliances and who's in, who's out. And it's just It's a lot of energy that you're putting in interpersonally, and it's like you got to remember what you've said to which person, and you're constantly navigating all that. Um, and what you don't realize is you're kind of navigating an externalization of your inner confusion, your inner woundedness, your inner terrain, and you're projecting that externally. And same with addiction, it just becomes more and more confining. It's like an inwardly coiling spiral that just gets tighter and tighter. You need to amp up. It's exhausting because you need more of the substance. You need more to get back to, what's the word, a baseline of satisfaction or freedom from pain. It's temporary, so it's unstable in that way. You start prioritizing the addiction over everything, right? It just takes more and more control. It's like these patterns come to enslave us. So uh, um, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get this all together here. Yeah, and there's a hypervigilance, I guess, is another way to say it. Constantly on the lookout. Um, there's this defensiveness towards reality. And so the healing path is surrendering all of that, laying it down, being willing to burn, being willing to feel it to heal it. And with that, simplicity dawns because you're not identifying with investing so much energy in maintaining the facade. So the paranoia starts to subside. You don't have to worry about being, yeah, you just don't have, you start moving through the world more coherently. Yeah, I think that's obvious, right? It's just with less masks, there's less complication. You can more and more be yourself, come what may. There's an innocence there, there's a honesty, there's a fullness. You travel with less baggage. So, trying to see if there's anything else I want to say. And isn't it lovely to be in the presence of sincere people? Doesn't something in your spirit just bloom, activate? It's like you can rest. Nature is sincere, right? And there's a peace there. There's a freedom from manipulation, I guess, is part of it. You're not trying to get something from somebody. You're not willing to be that which you're not willing to be manipulated. There's nothing in it for you. There's less and less in it for you. And that's where integrity comes from. That's where trustworthiness comes from. That's where, yeah, you think about it with yourself first and foremost. The simplicity of being held by God. It makes me feel a little bit emotional just saying that, but simplicity, there's a peace there, a rest. Come to me, all ye who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. But also with other people, you can see how that would just engender a kind of trust that people sense and see in action your integrity. You know, that you're not somebody who's going around talking shit or being unkind, that you're willing to have an honest conversation and say, you know, I was really upset about this. This really hurt. Or I really messed up. Please forgive me. I'm sorry. Or yeah, you know, that you have integrity in conversations, that you don't just kind of go into these, you don't buy into the sort of paranoid strategies of the people around you. You know, this person isn't here right now. I hear that you're upset, and I strongly suggest you go and talk directly to them. You know, if you're really upset about this, it might be worth having a conversation with them. Or, you know, I'd rather not talk about this person when they're not here. You know, however you want to language. Yeah, that language can kind of just over time start to emerge of how you protect those boundaries of sincerity and not getting swept up in confusion. But it can, you start to radiate, you start to shine a light of goodness, of peace, and some people fall away, some habits fall away. And that's not a easy thing. It's also not a bad thing necessarily. But it can also help people to feel safer around you and to trust you, to be less defended, help you to find the right kinds of people to hang out with, and just to hang out with yourself. I think that's the greatest blessing, is just to feel safe within yourself. And at a deeper level, again, being held by God, being held by grace, being safe to cry, being safe to express, being safe to grieve, being safe to be angry, letting that stuff come up. Anyways, take care.